Hello and welcome to video lecture 2A, Business and Business Ethics. Before getting to that topic, however, I need to say a few words of explanation about a point we made in video lecture 1A last week. I'm speaking of the distinction between ethics and morality that we offered in that video lecture. You may have noticed that this distinction differs markedly from that described in chapter 1 of the text, which is also a popular way of making the distinction. I'm not going to debate the merits of the two approaches here. I simply want to make the point that, for the most part in this class, any distinction will be largely irrelevant. In this course, we will use the terms morality and ethics, along with ethical, moral, etc. We will use them synonymously and interchangeably. Both refer to the evaluation of actions and situations rather than their mere descriptions. Both are concerned with concepts of right and wrong, of good and bad, and on a deeper level than simple practicality or etiquette. In fact, I want to return to the definition of ethical values given in the text for a solid understanding of exactly what we're talking about when we talk about ethics or morality in this class. At the top of page 17 in the text, our authors identify two key elements in ethical values. First, ethical values focus on human well-being. These values encourage and motivate decisions and actions that promote human welfare in areas such as respect, dignity, integrity, autonomy, etc. Ethics and morality are primarily concerned with the recognition, respect, preservation, and protection of the fundamental aspects of what it is to be a human being. Second, this respect for human well-being must be impartial. That is, all things being equal, no human is more important than any other when it comes to recognizing and protecting well-being. Most importantly, this includes us, the ones holding and applying the values. As far as morality is concerned, you are nobody special. Your well-being counts, of course, but prima facie, to use our term from last week, your well-being doesn't count any more than anyone else's, even if you're the one making the decisions. The text sums up this discussion by saying ethical values are those decision-guiding beliefs that impartially promote human well-being. This is precisely the sense in which we will be using the terms ethics and morality and their cognates in this class. And unless I tell you differently, it really doesn't matter which one we use. All things being equal, the terms ethics and morality are synonymous in this class. Now, on with Lecture 2A, Ethics and Business Ethics. In this video lecture, we introduce two very important concepts in the study of business ethics. First is the role of profitability in business, and second is a concept I call the business ethics perspective. This is a concept that we will get to later in the mini lecture, but it is very important and will be very important throughout this class. It is one that you need to understand well before going on. So pay close attention. I can guarantee you it will be on the quiz. Note, the business ethics perspective per se is not in your textbook. This is a product of the video lectures only. But the idea of the business ethics perspective, as you'll see, certainly is in the textbook. Now, business ethics begins with consideration of a very important question. Does a business's goal of making profit override all other concerns it might have? Or does a business have certain obligations that must be fulfilled even if those obligations conflict with maximum profitability? In other words, is making money the only real concern of business? Now, in order to understand how important this question is, we must begin by saying just a few words about what we mean by business. Businesses are organizations, of course, established to accomplish a certain purpose. But so are churches and schools and city governments, and we don't think of them as businesses. As we will use the term in this class, and as it is used primarily throughout the enterprise we call business, a business has two primary characteristics. First of all, a business is a private organization. By that we mean it is owned by private citizens, not by the government. It is an NGO, a non-government organization. While a lot of the issues we will talk about apply to governmental organizations as well, our focus will be specifically on their application to NGOs. But then churches and private schools and garden clubs and civic organizations are NGOs, but we don't call them businesses. What distinguishes a business from other NGOs? Well, this of course leads us to the second major characteristic. Businesses are profit-oriented. Businesses exist in order to make money. Businesses exist in order to make more money than they spend making that money. The difference between the money they spend and the money they make is, of course, profit. Businesses that make profit are successful. Businesses that do not make profit are not successful, and they don't stay in business for very long. I'm not telling you anything you didn't know before you started watching this video lecture. So there we have it. A business is a profit-oriented private organization. Businesses come in all shapes and sizes. There are small businesses, which are usually sole proprietorships owned and operated by a single person, or partnerships owned and operated by a small group of business partners. As businesses grow larger, they may become corporations, operated by a group of executives and managers, but owned in a sense by shareholders, people who invest in a business in return for a proportional share of the business's profits. Corporations can become quite large, with hundreds or thousands of shareholders and hundreds or thousands of employees, and dealing with huge expenses and revenues every day. And in the last few decades, many large corporations have become multinational corporations, with property, sales, and other interests in several or many countries around the world. While everything we talk about in this class will be applicable to some extent to any business of any size, we will especially concentrate on corporations and zero in on large corporations and MNCs. This is because the issues at stake and the consequences of actions among large corporations are much bigger and therefore much easier to study and track. But again, everything we talk about is applicable at some level to any business from sole proprietorships on up. Nobel Prize-winning economist Milton Friedman is famous for saying, among other things, the business of business is business. While this sounds quite redundant, it actually harbors a great and important truth. As we discussed just a minute ago, a business's number one reason for being in business is profitability. Businesses that are profitable survive and thrive. Businesses that are not go out of business. That's Business 101 summarized in 2 sentences. However, It's important to understand that profitability is not just a matter of having a positive bottom line on the next quarterly report. By profitability, we are not talking about a short-term effort to look good at an upcoming shareholders meeting. Profitability is a habit, a way of doing business, an ongoing process. It is a long-term concept that looks at the goal of wealth maximization. The working definition of profitability that we will assume in this class is this, and this is not in your textbook either. Profitability is the state in which a business is making the best economic use of its owners' or shareholders' capital, not necessarily through short-term profit, but also and especially through long-term wealth maximization. Notice that the words "and especially" are in italics. Profitable businesses may well go through quarters or years when the bottom line shows little or no profit, perhaps even a loss. But they are still considered profitable because over the long term they are returning higher dividends to their investors than the businesses that may boast very impressive short-term figures. Notice also the phrase "the best economic use." Sometimes the best economic use of capital is to invest it in large capital projects or other one-time projects so that the short-term profit is completely taken up by the expense. A business that builds a whole new plant with state-of-the-art equipment and room for expansion and growth may take years to make up the expense, but it can still be in the long run quite profitable. Further, notice the phrase long-term wealth maximization. This is the key term in this definition. Profitability relates primarily to a business's ability over the long run to produce the best payoff for its investors' investments. This may be in the form of cash dividends, increased stock value, or many other ways. Profitability is not just about generating a large amount of cash in a short amount of time. In fact, it's seldom about that at all. Given that businesses by definition have this ongoing and consuming focus on generating wealth, isn't it kind of strange to even think that there's such a thing as business ethics? Do business and ethics even go together? Many people think that the phrase is an oxymoron, a contradiction in terms like same difference or guest host or jumbo shrimp. After all, business is about looking out for self-interest, while ethics is about looking out for the interest of others. Ethicists refer to these concepts as egoism and altruism. Business is about getting, while ethics is about giving. Business is about profit, gaining that which you most desire and value, while ethics often requires sacrifice, giving up that which you value in order to accomplish something good for someone else. Nonetheless, there are at least two very important ways in which the concepts of business and ethics fit together very closely. The first is rather surprising. Businesses have a goal of being profitable, yes, but businesses also have a moral obligation to be profitable. They don't just want to be profitable, they ought to be profitable in the same way that you and I ought to be honest and ought to respect other people. It is a moral demand on business. After all, businesses, especially corporations, take money from investors on the promise that they will use that money to earn more money for the investors. In order to keep that promise, businesses must be profitable. If they're not profitable, or if they do not at the very least do their very best to be profitable, then they are breaking a promise. And breaking promises is immoral. As we'll see in the next lecture, profitability is a moral principle for business. It holds the same prima facie moral weight as harm prevention or non-parasitism. I just love saying that word. Furthermore, businesses are what we might call corporate citizens, and as such, they have certain moral obligations to the communities of which they are citizens. In many ways, businesses function as persons. They can own property, they can pay taxes, they enter into contracts, etc. Businesses are even identified in the laws of most countries as legal persons or artificial persons, meaning that even though they're not human beings, they still enjoy virtually all the privileges and protections that human beings are entitled to. And they incur many of the same kinds of obligations that human beings do. Businesses deal with individual people, with communities of people, and with the physical environment. Just as we have moral responsibilities to all of these things, so do businesses. Among the moral obligations of corporate citizens are fair treatment of the people it interacts with, customers, employees, and the like, social responsibilities to the communities where they do business, environmental responsibilities not to pollute or destroy the physical environs, and on and on. Virtually any way we can think of that individual citizens have moral responsibilities in their communities, businesses in those communities have the same kinds of obligations. So like individual human beings, businesses have moral obligations. So the question of ethics in business is a coherent one and a vitally important one. After all, many businesses are very large, and their actions affect a whole lot of people. So while you and I have the capacity only to help or harm a few people at a time, many businesses can help or harm many people with one responsible or irresponsible decision. So what do you know? Business and ethics do go together. But there's a problem here, and it's one I'm sure that some of you have already noticed. Many times, a business's obligation to be a good citizen will conflict with its obligation to be profitable. In other words, businesses are often faced with conflicts of moral principles, just as we discussed in Lecture 1B. In such cases, businesses, just like individual persons, face the task of deliberating among conflicting principles and reaching a conclusion about the business's applicable principle in any given case. This is why we will find it so useful to learn to apply our moral decision-making skills to business ethics. And remember, there is no hierarchy among moral principles. For any two principles, one may override the other in the right circumstances. For business ethics, this leads to two very important facts that you must keep in mind throughout the rest of this course. First, although we've seen that profitability is the moral responsibility for business, it does not always win when it conflicts with other responsibilities that the business might have. Sometimes a business will have an obligation to forego profitable decisions in order to fulfill other moral obligations. However, profitability doesn't always lose either. Our moral intuitions tend to lead us to believe that any time profitability conflicts with some other moral obligation, the business must forego the profit in order to fulfill the conflicting duty. But this violates our no hierarchy rule and shoves profitability to the very bottom of our list of moral principles. Remember, for any two principles A and B, there may be times when A overrides B, and there may be times when B overrides A. There is a tension to be acknowledged and a balance to be reached between a business's obligation as a business, that is, profitability, and its obligation as a corporate citizen. In fact, I believe that this tension between profitability and other moral principles is the unique feature that makes an ethics problem specifically a business ethics problem. In most, if not all, of the issues we will discuss in the coming weeks, we will analyze them in terms of a conflict between a business's moral responsibility to be profitable and some other moral responsibility the business has. So a critical perspective for one to have in business ethics is that of identifying and analyzing the conflict that exists between the business-specific moral principle of profitability and other responsibilities that businesses have as corporate citizens. I call this the business ethics perspective. Now remember, this term is not in your reading. It's a James Sennett original. But it's important and you will deal with it from now on, so pay attention. To look at a moral problem from the business ethics perspective is to analyze it as a conflict between profitability and some other moral obligation a business might have. I've said that about 4 times now. So this analysis involves asking 4 key questions. First, what is the profitability issue at stake? A very good way to think about this question is this. If there were no conflict, no moral dilemma, what would be the obvious thing for business to do, given that it is a business and it is in business to be profitable? Next, what corporate citizenship principle conflicts? What is the moral principle that will be violated if business takes the profitability option? The way to think about this is just the opposite of before. If there were no conflict, no moral dilemma, what would be the obvious thing for any moral person, real or artificial, to do? Third, what are the relevant facts and other concerns that need to be considered in making a decision about the actual duty in this case? This is the deliberation phase, of course, that we spoke of in Lecture 1A, where we gather and ponder evidence about which duty might override the other. We'll talk some more about the deliberation phase, particularly in business ethics, in the next video lecture. Over the course of this term, we will learn of many general concerns that should always be considered in any business ethics decision. Finally, which principle overrides? That is, what is the business's applicable principle? Again, we used that term in last week's video lectures. The answer to this question, what principle overrides, will not always be clear. And there will be times when the best we can do is to take what we see to be the most reasonable option. But that's the nature of ethics. We all know what it's like to face very difficult moral dilemmas where we must decide what to do, but it's not clear at all to us what the right choice is, even after we think about it for some time. In the end, we often have to do our best deliberation, then act in accordance with our best estimation, and hope it turns out well. Ethics is not science. It is not mathematics. It's messy, and it's often inaccurate, but it has to be done. Now, I want to stop here and make sure you understand something that is very important for getting this class and for doing well in it. If you do not understand this point, it will wind up costing you points on assignments, and it will hamper your ability to make good ethical decisions in business. Remember this point. Memorize it. Write it on your bathroom mirror so you see it first thing every morning. Write it on the back of your eyelids so you see it every time you close your eyes. Repeat this to yourself over and over, and whatever you do, do not forget it when doing the case analyses and quizzes for this class. Are you ready? Here it is. You've seen it before, but this time it's going to burn its imprint into your brain. Wait for it. Wait. Wait. When profitability conflicts with other corporate citizenship responsibilities. Profitability does not always win. Wait, there's more. But profitability does not always lose either. Can you tell that sometimes I have trouble with students getting this point? Again, it's very important to remember that profitability does not always win. Regardless of what many business people and economists think, sometimes a business must act against the most profitable option in order to be the best corporate citizen it can be. But profitability does not always lose either, regardless of what many news reporters, social activists, and politicians think. Sometimes a business's obligation to maximize the wealth of its investors takes precedent over other moral issues. Sometimes the morally right thing for a business to do is make the money, even at the expense of some human or social or environmental cost. Again, that's the way moral dilemmas work. College students of all ages have a real tendency to swallow whole what I call the myth of the big bad corporation. A big part of that myth is that there's something evil in the whole idea of profit. So when we hear of a situation where a business's profit efforts might conflict with any other moral principles at all, it seems obvious to us that the business is wrong and evil and straight from the pits of hell and must cease and desist immediately any activity that might cause any problems at all for anybody. In other words, if efforts for profit cause any problems at all for anybody, the business is obviously in the wrong and must stop what it's doing. Strange as it seems, I encounter this attitude among business majors just as often as I do other students. I'm sorry, but if you're a business major and you assume that business is always in the wrong when it puts profit ahead of any other issue people care about, then you'd better choose another major fast. You're setting yourself up for a miserable life because you're going to have to make those decisions regularly. Or you could just choose to understand that businesses are in fact morally obligated to pursue profit and should only choose to forego profit for a conflicting moral principle if there's good reason to accept that profitability is overridden in this situation. In the meantime, be forewarned. If you automatically assume that a business is wrong for choosing profit in any of your assignments in this class, you are guaranteed to lose points. No, profit doesn't always win, of course, but it doesn't always lose either. And if you think it does lose in any given situation, you'd better have reasons. Do not just take it for granted. You have been warned.